I'd like to remind you that this program is sponsored by the Woodside Arts and Culture Committee, a group of like-minded volunteers who are trying to create interesting program once a month here in our beautiful community of Woodside. So this evening, we're going to be covering an interesting subject, and it's a very timely subject when you consider the state of the world. Now, when it comes to spies, most of us probably are started out with Ian Fleming's wonderful James Bond. And in case you didn't know, Fleming was spending time in Jamaica, and by his typewriter, he was searching for the name of his spy. And he looked up, and lo and behold, there was a book, The Birds of Jamaica, and the author's name was James Bond. How about that? So, considering the time that we live in, it's been said that in this world, spies are the only ones that know the truth. And that may indeed be the case. So this evening, we are very fortunate because we have two presenters who are very familiar with the world of espionage. So for Leslie, secrecy is just another member of the family. Throughout childhood, her father's shadowy government job was ill-defined. Her mother's mental health stayed off limits. Even her queer identity remained hidden from her family and unacknowledged by Leslie herself. She pursues the truth of her family, her identity, and her father's role in Greece's CIA-backed junta. Our other presenter, Johanna, whose book, Six Car Links Behind an Elephant, imagine being married to a spy. Imagine keeping the big secret and moving your family from country to country to country. How does it all work? In this entertaining memoir, Lillian McCloy shares stories from her life as the wife of an undercover CIA officer. It is an eye-opening and often humorous tale about the CIA, marriage, family, secrets, friendship, and international adventures, and the meaning of home. So without further ado, here's Leslie and Johanna. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Johanna. That's Leslie. Thank you so much for having us, and welcome everybody. I know that many of you are residents of the area. We have some friends, and there's a former intelligence officer in our audience, but I'm not going to say who that person is.
Former sergeant.
Oh, nice. Very nice. So I thought I'd start by talking about the fact that it is very rare in the first place for two spy kids to even know of one another, never mind be friends. So I thought I'd start by talking about how we met. My mother wrote her memoir about her life as the wife of an undercover CIA officer. And when she passed away, the Chronicle had a feature article about my mother and the book. And Leslie read it, and she reached out to me. Turns out she had her own memoir about being the daughter of a spy. And so she reached out, and we immediately started going back and forth. She had an event going on at the book festival in Berkeley, so I went to that. And it was really impactful for me to sit in the audience and hear her talk about her experience and to just have the feelings about what we shared. And to hear it said so publicly was just very strange. So in conversations after that, we realized that even though we were both doing our own book events, talking about our respective stories, we had things in common and we had things that were very different. And we thought, what about doing an event together? So here we are. So I thought I'd start by asking you, Leslie, about what your father did. I think that would be a good start. What your father did and why he joined the CIA.
Thanks so much for that intro. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an honor. So my father, he was a chief of station in 2 locations. He was chief of base in 2 locations. His career was very rewarding for him. He ran the intelligence arm of the invasion of Grenada in the 80s under Reagan. He was sent to Vietnam toward the very end of the war. His first undercover field assignment was in Athens. My whole family arrived there. I was a baby. That was his first, as I said, field experience. His first assignment was the Cuban Missile Crisis. He worked on the famous Sherman Kent's team, which, watched the buildup of missiles on Cuba. My father was in a lot of those Cold War hotspots. And his career was very rewarding to him and very satisfying, and he received the Medal of Merit Award, and, I have a lot of pride for him. He joined, he was not recruited in college, which is often what people ask me. The Cold War was really heating up, and he was afraid that the days of the United States were numbered. This was 1961. He joined in 1961. The Bay of Pigs had failed a takeover to usurp Castro in Cuba. The Berlin Wall went up. Things seemed to be getting, the Soviet Union was spreading its influence in North Africa, all throughout Africa. So he was afraid. And it's something that's hard for me sometimes to relate to because I've lived my life in the free United States, right? But there was that time when many people really felt like this country could be obliterated, right? And so that fear really seized him. And so he decided, at the time, he was living in San Antonio. He was married to my mother. He was working at the city manager's office, so he was going to be a civil servant in a city. But he decided to travel to Washington, D.C. To try and get a job with the government. So he bought his own ticket, went to D.C., interviewed with the FBI and the AID and the Peace Corps. Much to my chagrin, I don't have a Peace Corps dad. Darn, that would have been different. And he also interviewed with the CIA. And the CIA offered him a job, and he took it. So he signed up because he wanted to protect this country. And it was this kind of volunteer position, this volunteer kind of impetus. He was part of the official CIA. His covers were the Defense Department or the Pentagon or the State Department. This is what he told people throughout my childhood. This is what I told people my father did. And it's only recently through meeting Johanna that I really came to learn that there was a whole other CIA that was much shadowier, that was deep cover. And really those folks had no protection. My father could always run to the embassy in whatever country he was if he needed to get out. But your father had a different story and lived a different cover, or lived a different level of safety and danger. So I wanted to hear again, sort of like, how did your father join the CIA? What was his experience? What was his role there?
So now people use the term, it's an official term now, the CIA. It's NOC, non-official cover, is what the term is now. When my father was doing the work, I'm not sure that was a term that was used. He referenced himself as working on the outside as opposed to on the inside. And the difference is that you do not have diplomatic immunity. You are in his case, even though it's undercover, he is actually doing the other job. It's not fake. So he worked for a corporation, and the way that it worked was that he did the job for the corporation during the day, and he did his spycraft outside of regular business hours. He got paid by the government. He did not get paid by the corporation. I think the term that's used is that the corporation is sponsoring a person. But basically, they're getting a free executive in exchange for their patriotism. Someone way up high in the corporation might know, well, does know, obviously, about it. But the people that my father worked with had no clue, obviously. So he performed his day job, but he got paid his government wage, which was less than his actual day job. So therein is already just a conundrum, because you're keeping up appearances, and you have to keep up appearances, but you're not really making the wage that you're supposed to look like you're making. So that can lead to all kinds of things. But as an undercover officer, you do not have diplomatic protection. So if he is discovered or was discovered, and we lived in various countries. I grew up in Spain, India, Japan, and Venezuela. I graduated from high school in Venezuela. And India and Venezuela were considered what they call hardship posts. And had he been found out or somehow outed there, he could have been arrested, put in jail, or even executed with absolutely no protection from the government. So it's very risky. They work outside, obviously. They don't interact with CIA operatives that are with cover in those countries because it's too risky. So they're alone. It's very isolating. And in that way, it's a thrill. That's the reason that he did it. He really enjoyed the thrill of it. But he was very alone. And it was very, very difficult in that way to do it. We didn't have privileges. We didn't have access to a commissary or anything like that, because that would have given it away. So living in a place like India was particularly tough. We didn't have flour. We didn't have milk. We couldn't get it from the commissary. And there was a lot of corruption. So that was very difficult as well. He had a different name with the CIA than he did. He wasn't not Frank McCloy. He had a different name. And nowhere in the CIA system is his real name shown. And I think that's true for everybody, because they do that for their own protection. And I think that's the nutshell there. Now I'm curious to know, here we are talking about what our fathers did. And we know. And that's not always the case. There are a lot of spy kids who never know. Some spy kids find out after their parent passes away. Some people find out when they're young. Some people find out when they're older. I'm curious if you would like to share how you found out about your dad.
Sure. And before I do that, I just want to underscore the point that you're making, which is it's very unusual for two children of undercover, official undercover, deep cover, children of spies to be in the same room, to be talking openly. There's a family culture. If you're in an intel family, perhaps you're in an Army intel, perhaps you're Navy intel, perhaps you're CIA intel. There's a family culture of silence and secrecy. I grew up with this, no one had to tell me. There was something about my father's job that we were not supposed to talk about. I didn't know what it was. I just knew we steered clear of it. It was essential to protect him to not talk about my father's job. And so that that sets a chilling effect in a family. We're keeping a secret. It's not explained why. We're not told to do it. When my father joined the CIA, it was a job. He was already grown up. It was a decision. For children, we're just brought up. It's the air we breathe. We're just brought up and don't talk about that. I'm picking up on something to not speak on. It's the family culture. It's what we're brought up in. And so for me, it was quite a journey for me to let go of my cover, and to come out openly and live an open life as the child of a, former CIA officer. That took a lot of psychological doing, a lot of courage, a lot of therapy. it was a journey, and and so that's what I just want to underscore. We have done a number of events together, and we meet other children, CIA spies, spy children, and I can tell right away they're whispering to me too, or they're like looking and waving and running out the door. I know the feeling. You're protecting your parent. It's a kind of, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's a kind of container, a box, a closet. It's a kind of closet that I feel children of spies are put in from birth, right? So, I've gone through a process of liberating myself, and it's completely worth it, but it's a lot of work, and it's rare. So I really appreciate, that I can have conversations with Johanna, that she's gone through her own process too, to speak about this. So I didn't find out, so I knew about the secret, hush-hush, father's doing something, chilling effect at home, a lot of things we don't talk about, this kind of shroud of secrecy on everything. But this was the 70s, and I was 10 years old, and my dad was stationed in Dallas, and I think that was under Carter, and Carter had cut a lot of the CIA staff, so my father was in this unusual, not living internationally, not living in Northern Virginia. We lived in Dallas. And one time, I decided, I wanted to find out what my father did. Something told me I want to break this. What is this? I wanted to figure out my father, what made him tick. And so, he was on his way out the door, and he had his briefcase in hand, and I just stopped him, and I'm wearing, my long ponytail and my, hip hugger jeans, and I say, "Dad." And he turns around, and he's kind of a straight-laced guy. And I said, what's your job? And he said, he appraised me for a moment. He said, "I'm in the Army." And I said, "Okay." It made me proud. He's protecting America. I accepted it. I had never seen him in a uniform, but I wanted to be proud of him, and I imagined him protecting this country. Then, fast forward a month or two later, he's on the phone with somebody, and he says, "Yeah, I'm with the State Department," whoever he's talking to. And I'm like, I knew I couldn't trust him. I didn't know what he did. I didn't know why he was lying. I didn't know, but I knew my father was lying to me. And so this is the first time that I sort of experienced that kind of, now I'm really keeping a secret. Now he's really keeping a secret that I can't share, that my father's lying to me. So that's the backstory that I had. And then I went underground again. My father lies. I don't know what he does. Everything's getting kind of creepy. And then 3 years later, I'm 13 on a family drive in Northern Virginia. Now my father's stationed in Langley. My parents had some kind of maybe interaction in the house. There was some kind of argument air in the car. We went off on these Sunday drives every Sunday. We were doing our usual thing, and my mom, was looking out the window, but she was not talking about the pretty lawns like she usually did. And I was bored. I hated all of these family drives, And out of the blue, my mother said, "Michael, tell the girls what you do." And I was like, okay. And my father, white-knuckling the steering wheel. And he said, "Oh, well, I'm a manager. I manage information." He was talking in circles. At some point, he said, "I manage people in an office." And my mother was getting a little frustrated, and she turned to me and my sister, and she said, "Girls, do you have any questions for your father and his work managing people?" And, I love this mode my mother was in. She was like, this is brass ovaries. She'd had it. She'd had enough of it, right? And so my sister and I asked questions, and we tried to pin my father down, and he just kept talking in circles. Managing events, what kind of events do you research? World events. What kind of world events? International events. So my sister and I were never going to be able to get him to pin him down. And eventually my mom saw that we were giving up. And she just said, you work for the CIA, don't you? And my father didn't agree. He didn't assent. He didn't deny it. We just did the rest of the drive in silence. So that just is a family story, but that gives you an idea of, that's the first time I found out what my father did. And I just thought James Bond, et cetera. But we didn't talk about it the next day or the next week. It just went underground again, back into silence. How did you find out?
I know there's a little more to that story, too. It's kind of a fun tidbit. We'll get to that. In my case, my father told me, out of the blue. I was 15, and I have an older brother and sister. My brother was in college. He had already graduated from high school. My sister was in the States she was a freshman. So my mom was with her, getting her ready for her first year in college. So we lived in Tokyo at the time, and my father and I flew back. And the night we flew back, we went to have dinner. And at the restaurant, he was a very jovial person, and he got extremely serious in a weird sort of energetic way. I could pick up on it. And he said, when we get home, I have something to tell you. And that was very strange, right? So being 15, I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What do you have to tell me? He's like, we're not going to talk about it right now. And I'm thinking, what? You talk? Oh, is someone sick? No one's sick. He was starting to get angry now. Like, what is going on? Jet lag? I don't know. So we get back to the house, and he says, I'm going to go upstairs, and I'll call you when I'm ready. Okay. So I'm sitting on the couch wondering what is going on. Something's really strange. And I picked up the phone. What does a 15-year-old girl do but call her friend? And I started whispering on the phone, my father's acting very strange. And my father screamed from the top of the stairs, get off the phone. And I hung up, and I knew at that moment something serious was going to be said that was going to change my life. I just knew it. It was something really, it just made me shake. So he said, okay, I'm ready. Okay, so I go upstairs, and I don't know what to expect. And he's just sitting on his bed. He's in their room, and he's sitting on his bed. He's wearing his yukata. He used to wear the Japanese summer robes. Basically, he just was getting emotionally ready. He had a cocktail. He had a cigarette. And he said, have a seat. I sat at the end of the bed, and he said, what do I do for a living? And I thought, you're a businessman? Yeah, I am, but I do something else. Oh, what is that? He said, I work for the CIA. Now, you can imagine, like, what do you say? That doesn't just, register. I said, what do you mean? What? And then I started thinking James Bond, so I said, oh my God, are you running around people's yards and sneaking into homes and taking pictures of things? And he's like, no. So what ended up happening is we talked for about an hour and a half. And he said, I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And he told me, I do the job that you think I do. That is a truth, and that will always be a truth. So if someone asks you, because I asked him, what am I supposed to tell people now? He said, same thing you've been telling them. It's not untrue. I do work for this corporation. I just do this job on the outside. And he told me about the importance of the job, and he told me about the relationships that he was forming with the people, his assets, and why he was gone at night, and that he was in hotel rooms meeting with people getting information and how important it was for him to feel trusted by these people, because they're putting their own lives at risk by sharing the information that they are sharing with him. And he was a very amiable person. He was a total people person, very empathetic, great sense of humor, and he was just really someone that they felt that they could trust. So that didn't surprise me. But I came away from that. He said, you can go to your room and I'm here. You can come back anytime if you have any questions. But I swear I felt like I was in some kind of fun house where everything's upside down and, who is my father? I had this sense of my father being this corporate businessman, and now he's a spy. I really had to calibrate, is how I always put it. I had to recalibrate my entire past. When we went through customs and he was strange with his briefcase, that's what it was. Because what he ended up doing was, he said, let me show you. He said, pick up my briefcase. I did. He said that there's a secret compartment. Now it starts getting fun, What are you talking about? I mean, this is a briefcase that has been with him for as long as I've known. It's like part of him. And we had just gone through customs that night with that briefcase. And he says, try to find it. So I'm like, I'm going to find it. So I open the briefcase and I try and I try and I try. And no way. So he's like, you give up? I said, yeah. He turned it. He did something. He turned it back around and there was an open compartment. And he said, look inside. And I looked inside and there were some notebooks, Japanese regular notebooks with his handwriting, and 2 passports. And he said, look at the passports. One was German. I opened it, and it was a picture of him with a mustache, looking very different, and a completely different name. And that's when it got serious. That's when I realized, okay, this isn't fun and games. This is the real thing. So the calibration experience of trying to, living in India, we got escorted by guards at one point to go to the school bus. The international school bus would pick us up. And he told me later there was a threat to the kids' lives. It's just crazy. But once he did tell me, everything changed in terms of how the dynamic was in the household. We moved to Venezuela my senior year, and my mom was very grateful that I knew at that point because I was like her confidant. It was a very, very difficult move. It was a hardship post, and she did not want to go there. And I think she felt really, good that she could talk to me about it. So let's talk about after we found out, like the recalibration experience, how you look back on your life, how did you go about the processing? And I know in your case, like in your book, there's 2 secrets, right? You're coming out in 2 different ways. So I'm curious to find out how that went for you.
Thank you. I guess, it's just what I want to say is piggyback on what you just said also, which is when your father came out to you, it changed the dynamic in the house. It changed your relationship, which I can understand. Your father was upfront with you, right? And I was just thinking about that when you just said it because, for me, I think when my father said, I'm in the Army, and then later I find out through my mother, no, he's not in the Army. And that lie, learning that it was a lie, for me, that set me on a very different path, right? A path of not trusting my father. And, the queer identity, I knew I was gay when I was a girl. I knew it was, not okay, not a good thing. I didn't share it until I started until college, post-college. It felt very natural to keep 2 secrets. I learned from the best. Just how to be closeted within myself, how to not share. But not trusting my father was kind of this legacy, I think, from being in the CIA. And so could I trust him? I go through adolescence. I finally do come out to him in a letter when I'm in my 20s. I tell him I'm gay, and he can't accept it. He says we don't have to lose contact, but it's not natural, and I don't accept it. And so that was another blow, and so our relationship was so fragile all along. And then that blow occurred. And then, I just suffered through a lot of my 20s and 30s with, a parent that I couldn't relate to, that I didn't feel close to, that I didn't trust. And my mother, unfortunately, had died of breast cancer when I was in high school. So really in my adulthood, I was left with this, he wasn't a silent person. He was sociable. He was, he told jokes. He was fun, but he was also a straight-laced guy, and distanced and removed, and emotionally not very available. And so I just had this father that I didn't trust. And it wasn't until I was really 40, and I realized, I'd already had a commitment ceremony with my wife, Susan, which my father did not attend. My relationship with my father is so frayed. And I thought, and I was very critical of the CIA and many of its missions and my father's assignments. He was stationed in Greece. The CIA in Greece was very much seen as a close collaborator with the Greek military dictatorship. Was my father on the right side of things? Was he on the wrong side of things? Was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? These were just things that were just accumulating inside me. And, it wasn't until I was 40 that I realized, I can stay distanced from my father forever. I cannot trust him forever. I can keep on thinking the CIA is bad and evil and is behind all the bad things in this world. Or I can decide to look at it all and try and understand my life and try to understand him. So that was really the start of this book journey, really to solve my relationship problems with my father, to try to understand him. So, it was a 17-year process of writing this book. I interviewed him eventually for this book. He thought it was just about the Greek junta. I didn't say, it's about you. Because I knew that wouldn't go over well. But, it was a long journey, and I learned a lot, and I researched a lot, and I researched his assignments, the ones that I knew about, and I spoke with him, and I came to, and he also, it's not too much of a spoiler, but he did, in his later years, in his 70s, passed away, came to accept me, my sexuality, embraced my wife. So really, I feel like I've been through this journey of reconciling with my father. And it was through writing that it occurred. Writing dragged me through everything. And I'm grateful because, I see my father in a more complex way than when I started. But it was a difficult journey because he wasn't upfront with me. And he wasn't, his job was to not disclose who he was. He was doing it to protect me. I understand that. I understand. But when you're 10 and you're just lied to, you don't understand it. And I think that's one of the probably necessary, unfortunate byproducts or, baggage of being an undercover clandestine officer. What do you tell your children? Later in life I said, he came out of, he went through a process to have his covers removed so that he could speak openly about having been in the CIA. And it was a very CIA agency-controlled process. And I'm grateful that he did that, because if he did not do that, I would not be speaking to you right now, right? He was greenlit to go ahead and acknowledge that he had been a CIA officer. But I said to him once, Dad, so when were you planning to tell me and my sister? This moment of, and he said, I don't know. And I appreciate his honesty. He said, it's not the kind of thing you think at 14 or 15. now's the day to tell them, you know. But so I applaud your dad for taking that risk, you know, and I'm grateful for my journey, different from yours, but I can really appreciate how that shifted things for you and how that's a connection and would change the relationship. So anyway, you know, speaking openly was a journey that was brought about through writing and writing my memoir. And it brought my father and I into much more of a reconciled place. So I'm very liberated for having written this book. I feel, you know, accepted. I was accepted by my father. It was, I feel grateful for the whole journey, the whole rocky journey. What was it like for you, Johanna, to, you know, your mother wrote a book. You've told me many things about that process of writing her memoir and what that did for you. So what was it like for you to sort of come out of your spy child closet?
The spy child closet, I love it. You know, in my case, one of the things that I really had a hard time with for a very long time, and I'm realizing it's only recently that I'm really accepting that I'm an American. I know that sounds really odd. I mean, I always knew I was an American, but I grew up overseas. I grew up in international communities, moving from country to country. And my sense of belonging was there with kindred kids from all over the world who were there temporarily, just like I was. No one knew how long they would be there. You make fast friends, you have adventures, you're in new cultures, you're speaking different languages. And then you come back to, in my case, not back to, but go to America, where I had not lived. We moved to Spain when I was 3 months old. So my parents made a pretty bold choice of putting me into a Spanish Catholic school, along with my siblings. My siblings are a few years older than me, so they spoke some English, but we spoke only Spanish at home. And that was the case for 7 years. And I considered myself a Spaniard. And I was a very proud Spaniard. And then one day we were told we were moving to India. And I was a really rebellious little kid. And I was like, no, I'm not, in Spanish. Yes, you are. And you have to learn English. It's time to learn English. And I really had a thing about Americans. I did not like Americans. And even though we were, when my parents would speak in English, we called it adult language because we didn't understand. And they would use it on purpose, when they wanted to have adult language. My brother and sister understood a little bit, but I did not. And then we moved to India, and first they put us in intensive English classes. And I was failing on purpose. I was being a little brat. I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to learn English, and that was that. And but we moved. That happened anyway. I didn't have much say. And we go to the international school in New Delhi, and it's English speaking, and I don't understand. And I'm not, and I have an accent, and I'm being made fun of. And boy, at that age, you learn quickly to adapt. And that's what I did. And I Americanized myself pretty quickly. My father kept saying, keep using your Spanish, but there was really no reason to keep using the Spanish. And anyway, just moving around that way, I just really did not feel like I belonged anywhere in America. I didn't relate to anybody. I didn't have anything in common. I didn't understand traditions and customs and things that people did. We didn't do those things. I didn't grow up with relatives. I didn't see my grandparents. I didn't know what it was like to do that all the time. And when we would come, I didn't have friends. So we'd be here in the summer, and we'd just be alone because we didn't have any friends. We'd come to California. My father was from Oakland. My mother was Canadian. And so California was home, and I loved California. I just absolutely loved California. I loved Northern California, particularly. Yay! And so I knew I would be in California. when I was in the United States. But for me, that really was the hardest thing, beyond even, my father's a spy. It was like we had an expat lifestyle, and that was the lifestyle that I knew, and that was the lifestyle that I wanted. And to go to college was the worst culture shock I ever had. Coming to America and looking like everybody and sounding like everybody, but feeling like I was a foreigner and no one understanding. And then people would say, "Where are you from?" Oh my God, my brother and sister and I were like, that fucking question. Where are you from? How do you answer that? My brother, when he went to college at UCLA, they had on their dorms the name of the person and where they were from. And it said John Tokyo, and he's blonde. He looks very Swedish, practically. And he would get kidded about it all the time. Like, "Well, you don't speak Chinese," was what they would say. Here it says Japan, whatever, Tokyo. But anyway, for me, that was the hardest part, really, of reconciling. Beyond the secret, even. Beyond the secret. It's just... but I have come around to it. I've been living in America for a long, long time, and I'm realizing how very, very American I am now. And I'm coming around to really accepting, not only accepting, but just acknowledging my own prejudice or my own judgment about Americans. I used to think they were very ignorant, and they were very closed-minded, and they didn't really, and that's true for a lot, but that's probably true in a lot of places. But I understand it more now. I understand why some, people may not be as cognizant of what's going on internationally or have a sensitivity about it. Why would they? They haven't left home. They don't have an experience like I did. So, but anyway, that was a whole distraction. My mother wrote her memoir many years before it was published. She wrote it in '93 after the Oakland Hills fire. She had a house that burned down in the Oakland Hills fire, so we lost everything in that fire. And she rebuilt, and when she rebuilt, she decided to sit and write about her experience as the wife of an undercover officer. She used a pseudonym. She changed some of the countries, made up countries. She changed all the names. And she actually had an agent in New York who was very, very interested. And the problem was, it was a pseudonym. There was no ebooks. There was no, retail online. So you had to be able to sell your book in a bookstore. And how do you do that with someone? Is it a biography? No, memoir was not a thing. It is now. So there was no, even though publishers really liked it, they just didn't know how they would sell it. So they didn't pick it up. But she got some really nice letters. So it was shelved. And it was many years later, she was turning 90. She was in assisted living, and I'm a freelance writer and an editor, and I decided that I would declare on her birthday, because I knew if I declared it on her birthday, I would have to do it, that I would transcribe her manuscript. I would take it, I would transcribe it, I would edit it, and I would publish it. And I did. And lo and behold, I only did it for her, really. I did as professional job as I wanted it to be, but I didn't plan on marketing it or anything. And I got blurbs from John le Carré. I got all kinds of great letters and endorsements from authors. And it's selling more copies every year. It was published in 2016. It sells more copies every year, even though I haven't marketed it. I do my own outreach, but that's as far as it goes. And it's not the story I'm telling, obviously. It's my mother's story, but I know all of those stories myself, having grown up with it. And despite not really depicting the humor in this particular conversation, there's a lot of humor in her book. There's a lot of really just crazy stories. So I just want to share that in case you're interested in reading the book. It's a romp in many ways, but it's also really honest and sad. She was very depressed for a lot of that time. But that's the story of how that book came to be.
I'm just wondering, we could open it up to you guys for questions.
Yeah. Any
Want to leave
questions?
space for that?
Sure. Yeah.
Just a minor logistics question. Did you have to clear your books with the CIA?
In my case, my mother, I talked to Bob Baer, who's a former CIA operative who wrote a book with his wife, The Company We Keep. And I talked to Scott Johnson, who wrote about his dad, The Wolf and the Watchman, and he's an investigative journalist. And they both indicated that this was not revealing any secrets that weren't already out there. A. B, it had been 25 plus years since my father passed away. And at that point, it becomes, okay to share. And C, it's our story, not his. We didn't sign anything. So they convinced me that it was okay. And that's when the weirdest part about transcribing and editing my mother's book was taking all our names and replacing them with our real names. It was really, and then changing the author to her, and then sitting down with her and telling her, "Are you okay with this?" And I told her why, and it is a big deal, to come out like that. But yeah, in my case, and since it's been, since 2016, and all I get is just, it actually got reviewed by the CIA's own newsletter or their own periodical, which, okay, we're good.
That's a good question. I feel very fortunate that my book was published by an independent press in Washington State, Latah Books, that is established and run by a journalist. So I had this respect from this, from my editor. And I researched my book, I researched all the historical information, the geopolitical information, and I stood behind it. My publisher never asked me, John Gosh at Latah, never asked me, we got to clear this. I know I have other author friends with bigger presses that, let's say, aren't run by journalists, who probably their legal department said, we need to run this by the agency. So I know other authors who had to have their memoirs run through the agency, changed dramatically by the agency's sort of review board, things redacted. That there was nothing to disclose, but a lot of their story was removed, was changed for them. They were prevented from telling their full story. And again, this wasn't that they were disclosing things that were sensitive, but for whatever reason, a lot of their story was redacted. Mine, I would never have done that. I never would have allowed it. I knew I didn't have secrets, and I wasn't putting anyone in danger, and my father was already out as an officer, officially. So I wouldn't have done it. But I felt really grateful that my press was really stood behind me, too. And it was unusual. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is your father went through this whole process of being released. Did your father have to do that? Or he just...
No, actually, my father passed away only 4 years after he retired. He retired at the age of 50, so he was very young. And he passed away 4 years later. He was doing some visiting professorships at a university, and he was really liking it. He really liked it, talking about international relations. He just loved talking to the college kids, and that was an avenue that he was considering. He had worked for a defense contractor, and they had lived in Southeast Asia when I was in college. But he had just been let go, and he was having a really tough time with adjusting to not being a spy. He was very depressed, and he had an aneurysm, and that was that. So we never had to go through that process.
Just because he passed.
Correct, yeah, because he passed. And that's part of the reason why, someone had told me 25 years after someone passes, you can talk about it, especially if you're a family member. I mean, I'm not revealing his spy craft. I'm not talking about what he did or who he talked to. I guess at this point you probably could too, actually, but yeah.
No, I have one more.
Yes.
And so when your mother brought up this family conversation, did she know she had breast cancer? Was this something that she wanted you guys to know before she passed, or was this?
That she had breast cancer?
Or
Yeah.
I'm just questioning what motivated her to surface this in a family Sunday drive.
Right. I do not know.
Okay.
I think that she had it, my feeling is she had it up to here with carrying her husband's secret. We had to move all the time. We had to move every 2 years. You're uprooted. You can't tell, hi, I'm new in town. She had to hold the cover also. I think the secrecy, I think the being dragged around, I think perhaps the interpersonal issues between them. I think she was kind of, fed up. That's the meaning I make of it, that she was sort of fed up with the secrecy, because she didn't just go off saying, I'm sick of this life. She was like, tell them what you do. It was very pointed. So I think she was fed up with the secret and with, silence and secrecy in our family.
So I have a question about, did your siblings know before you did?
Oh.
What was the inter-family relationship is?
Yeah, that was interesting too. Yeah, my father told me, I told your brother and your sister when they were 16. Talk about recalibration. They knew and I didn't know. And I recalled one time when we were all still, and they were still in high school, and they were whispering in my sister's bedroom. And I being the little sister, I came, what are you talking about? And it was very serious, and they were like, get out, we're having a conversation. And I was like, what is going on? These are the things you calibrate. Like, okay, was that, they must have been talking about that, And I often say that it felt like I was adopted. I felt like I was told I was adopted when my father told me. Because I felt like, who is this family? And they all knew, and they were all walking around with a secret, and they didn't tell me, and I didn't know. But because they were in college, I didn't get a chance to interact with them. And by the time I did, it was like we weren't really talking about it. They were off in their own world doing their own thing. So we didn't really get into those conversations. But they were each told when they were 16. Yeah.
I'm curious, throughout your lives, how many different languages have you kind of spoken in one way or another? And which one of those still?
Yeah. Well, in my case, Spanish was my first language. So Spanish stuck with me. And then when we went to Venezuela, when I was a senior in high school, I was actually excited about it because I was missing my Spanish. But then I realized Venezuelan Spanish is not Castilian, It's very, very, very different. I mean, you almost don't understand it. But I was up for that challenge. So Spanish, and then I lived in Japan for 6 years, from 6th grade to the end of my junior year in high school. But it was an international school, so we didn't really need to learn Japanese, but you pick it up. I mean, you're living there, and you use a lot of sort of Japanglish, in your interactions. And I actually, in college, was having such a hard time not knowing what I was going to do that I ended up, just for nostalgic reasons, taking Japanese and taking international relations and anthropology, and just to feel connected to my past. So I ended up learning Japanese after I left Tokyo. I did go back to Tokyo for an intensive summer class when I was a junior in college. But that was the extent of it.
Since I lived in Greece, in Athens, Greece, when I was a kid, so I learned Greek and English at the same time. So I speak Greek now. I speak a good sort of intermediate Greek. I've been back many times. It was always kind of a home base for me because then after that we moved every 2 years. and I just became sort of rootless in my life, and so Greece was always calling me back. So I've been many times, and I studied there, and I speak Greek, and so in a way, kind of, if I think about it, Greece and the language kind of was co-raised me. They were the third parent there. Yeah.
So I know people who have worked for USAID and been foreign service officers, and I've always wondered, like you're not allowed to, like certain levels of secrecy, or if you're deep cover, you can tell your wife, you can tell your kids, but otherwise, no, you can't. Like, aren't there rules about that?
That's a good question. I mean, perhaps someone in here knows and can tell us. Okay. My mother knew. And she knew from the beginning, and so she always knew. I think that was kind of a generational issue. My sense is that the CIA, just to speak from the CIA, not AID or other intel branches, that it's sort of evolved. I know of people who were never told that their parent was in the CIA, that the wife was never told. I think that occurs too. I think less and less. I think now there's more openness. But I think that my guess is the CIA evolved a little bit more, evolved with the times in that way. But, we weren't allowed to be open. My mom didn't tell people at the grocery store, she didn't tell her family. My father did not tell his family. He just worked for the government. Everybody's like, the brothers were like, so... Yeah, I think that there are unspoken rules. Probably, if you're an officer, you go through training, you're probably told the rules of who you can and cannot tell, for sure.
Yeah, in my father's case, because he was undercover, you don't talk about it. That's not an option, unless you want your life to be on the line. That's just not, it's not cool. So that's instilled. And they are told they can tell one person. That's it. Each of my parents told a sister. They chose not to tell their parents because they didn't want them to worry, and they didn't know if they'd fully understand. Or, we were living way across the world. And this is the 70s. It wasn't the internet. You wrote a letter, and it took 7 to 10 days to receive, and then you wrote a letter back. So there was no real connection with people. But yeah, so in my case, with my parents, my 2 aunts knew, and that was it.
What did it say? I think that there's sort of like the official rules. That's interesting. You can tell one person. My father came from sort of Protestant, Midwestern people culture. So there was this kind of silence, we don't talk about things anyway. So I think, I can imagine my dad would have been told, you can tell 3 people. Okay. Did he tell 3 people? No, he did not. That's just what I imagine. But, there's a funny story. We were living in Athens, and my father's brother came to visit, and he's 2 years younger, and so my father would have been 30 in Athens, and his younger brother would have been 27. And they were just tooling around town. They went into a store. They were about to go into a store. And of course, my father had just told his family he works for the government. That's it. So everybody was kind of hush-hush in the family, right? He didn't tell us 1 or 2 people. So they were about to go into a store, and my dad was opening the door, and he turned to my uncle, and he said, by the way, everyone here knows me as Fred. And my uncle has told me the story. And then they went in, and my Uncle Tom is just like for this whole life thinking, oh my God, Fred, what was that about? So it kind of can become your personal culture, regardless of the permission you're given to break your silence.
I want to share one little story. Just a funny little story. Well, there's a few of these in my mother's book. These are the kinds of stories that she shares. But when we were living in Spain, there was someone that my father was working with or befriended, and it occurred to my father that he'd be a really good asset or agent. And he checked with the powers that be above him, and they said, "Sure, give it a shot." But they said, "We'll ask first if the guy's interested, and if he is, we'll set up a meeting." And the guy was interested, so they told him to go to a particular coffee shop, and put down a $50 bill, and the person who he was meeting would have the other half. Oh, my father was looking forward to that. He was like, oh, this is going to be fun. And he went with my mom just to make it even harder for this guy. So he says, let's get there early. So my dad and my mom are sitting in the coffee shop, and then he comes, and he's like, oh, because he sees my dad, and he doesn't know he's the guy. So he's like, oh, he's turning white, and my dad says, come on over. Hey, look at who's here. And he's trying to figure out what to do, like, shoot, I'm supposed to meet someone here. And he sits down across from my dad, and my dad puts down the $50. So that's some ways that people find out.
Kind of as a follow-on to the other question about, did you talk about it with your family members? So
You mean within the family? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
You said you didn't really talk about it with your brother and sister because they're away. I mean,
Oh,
I
right.
on the phone.
Right.
And I would be like,
Oh, I
"You're
know.
not going anywhere. I want to know what you know."
Yeah. No, I mean, we were...
About 10 years ago.
In my case with my dad, he was very open with us. And even while he was still alive, Christmas and, we would have very open conversations about all of it. My mom was very forthcoming. It was really more revealing where the spots were in our existence that the secret was being kept that we hadn't thought about. But otherwise, we had a crazy expat life, and we would share those stories anyway. But my family was very different from Leslie's in that they loved their cocktail parties. They were really, it was like a very cosmopolitan existence. They played jazz, they had journalists over for dinner, and they were very open. So for us, it was very easy, and we did have those conversations all the time.
I should say I have a younger sister. So all through adolescence, we were constantly commiserating with each other. Dad is weird. Dad is paranoid. Look how he's looking in the rearview mirror. He's driving again. Do you see that? He's following. He's so weird when he sits in restaurants. He's looking around. We were always on the same page together, and we stayed that way throughout life. And as I mentioned, my mother died when I was in high school, so I wasn't able to process with her. But I've since talked. The uncle who was told, they know me as Fred here. I've had many conversations with him, So I've had many conversations I had conversations with my father, So I think you don't get to this place of writing a book openly if you don't eventually just peel away the layers of onions. But that's a good question.
I guess we'll have one more.
Yeah.
I have a little different question, and that is, were there any women who were undercover people at the time, or was it almost always men and their own families were part of their cover?
I think women. I think the wives were part of the cover, and the families were props in a lot of ways. But I think there were a lot of husband and wife teams, and of course there are a lot of books that are coming out now. Hillsberg, there's a woman who was in the CIA who has a memoir out now. So I feel like the agency was kind of patriarchal and has become more women as officers, and so that's what I think. I think it's opened up more. But there were a lot of husband and wife. They were both officer. I knew that in my social world, and that still happens to today. So, but I think it's still a fairly patriarchal, male-based organization.
Yeah, I've actually talked about this with an officer that I'm writing a book with now, and he was with the CIA. He's retired now. But he trains people, and he said it's really hard for women. They're very good at it, but being undercover as a woman is very difficult compared to a man. The danger level goes up, and some of them just don't like the fact that they can't have relationships. They have a really hard time forming relationships and keeping the secret that way. So it makes it very difficult. But there are definitely undercover women, for sure. And there are memoirs, too, that you can find. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you all for coming this evening. It was a very special evening for all of us. And I want to remind you that they have their books that they were mentioning. They're available here for to purchase, and perhaps your question didn't get answered this evening, but you may find that answer within the book. Now, next month, we're going to shift from espionage and that life to bobcats. We have a wonderful naturalist and photographer who will be coming to talk about bobcats in our backyard. We're fortunate to live in an environment where bobcats can be found, as well as mountain lions and other critters. So I hope you'll come back for that. And we want to thank you again this evening. Remind you that we have our own YouTube channel. You can find the links online. And so if you wanted to recap this evening's presentation or any of our other presentations, those are available for free on YouTube. So thank you all again. Please drive home carefully and take care of each other. Thank you.